Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're peeling back the layers of a company we all interact with constantly, one that has often, crafted this image of boundless innovation and youthful idealism. We're talking about Google. We've got excerpts from a really fascinating book, Desnudando a Google by Alejandro Suarez Sanchez Ocaña. And our mission today is to move beyond the familiar narrative, the sort of Sergey Brin and Larry Page meteoric rise story. As the author himself puts it, if you're looking for like a simple Walt Disney-esque tale of brilliant young people doing good, well, this might not be it. Instead, we're stepping into what the author calls Google's hidden history, exploring the privacy concerns, the monopoly accusations, the often intense conflicts with other corporate giants. It's almost like taking the red pill from the Matrix, isn't it?
It absolutely is, yeah. And what's particularly compelling right from the start is how the author frames his own journey. He admits he was once a Google fan, completely enamored. But over the years, his relationship with the company evolved, became this kind of genuine love-hate mix, which came from a sense that Google had, well, in his view, lost its initial spirit. He promises an objective look, yes, but also a firm challenge to that romantic young people conquering the universe narrative.
That shift in perspective is really key, I think. So as we dive in, we'll be uncovering how this peculiar company truly operates. From its humble origins in a Stanford dorm room to becoming what some describe as an empire drugged with steroids with a finger in every industry. Let's
Yeah.
begin our exploration. The Genesis story. From Stanford dorm to search engine. Okay, let's rewind to the familiar starting point. 1998. Sergey Brin, he was 23 then, and Larry Page, 24. Two brilliant computer science engineers at Stanford. They officially launched Google. They were, in the author's words, brilliant gooks, driven by this almost obsessive desire to organize the world's information.
Right. And it's interesting, they actually didn't get along particularly well initially, apparently argued constantly. But their shared passion for computing and math, both being sons of professors, that eventually drew them together. Their doctoral project, which they humorously called Backrub, that was the seed, its goal was revolutionary for the time, ordering web pages by importance. And this led directly to the birth of the now iconic PageRank algorithm.
And what's truly astonishing about their early growth is just the scale, isn't it? In 1998, Google indexed 26 million web pages. Okay, seemed like a lot then. But just a decade later, that number had exploded to 1 billion. How did they achieve that kind of phenomenal growth, especially when you had established players like Yahoo and AltaVista already so dominant?
Yeah, that's where their innovation truly shone. I mean, their initial web page design, for instance, it was such a stark contrast to the cluttered, ad-heavy sites of that era. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. Walls of text and banners.
Exactly. Google was all about simplicity and utility, clean white page, search box. But the real game changer, as you mentioned, was PageRank. You can think of PageRank like a highly sophisticated academic citation system, but for websites. A link from a really reputable or authoritative site counted significantly more than one from, say, a brand new blog. This mechanism just revolutionized search results. It prioritized true relevance and authority, which was a crucial departure from competitors like Yahoo, who were still, believe it or not, manually curating web directories.
Manually, yeah.
Yeah, it was simply a far more scalable and effective model for the growing web, the early business model. Dream scenario to add empire.
Now, many of us might assume Google's rise was just seamless, like a straight lineup. But the author reveals it was anything but, especially early on. The dot-com bubble had just burst, which made online advertising a very tough sell, right?
Extremely tough.
Yeah. And the author himself recounts this story, what he called a dream scenario, back in 2001. Google apparently offered him a fixed-price annual agreement to buy all the advertising from his web portals. Guaranteed income. This, he says, was basically the embryo of what we now know as AdSense.
That early approach, this kind of premium guaranteed model, rather than the more common commission-based one back then.
Yeah.
It really highlights Google's innovative and, frankly, pretty aggressive entry into the online advertising space. It showed their strategic vision, definitely. And it led directly to the launch of AdWords in 2000. AdWords fundamentally reshaped how advertisers operated. It shifted the focus to cost per click, or CPC, and incredibly highly segmented advertising. Targeting became precise.
So how did that strategic pivot, from those fixed agreements to these highly segmented cost-per-click models? How did that reshape the whole online ad landscape and Google's own growth?
Oh, it was absolutely revolutionary. Google proved that web advertising, if segmented precisely, could be incredibly effective and surprisingly low cost. It moved way beyond those old, ineffective banner ads everyone kind of ignored.
Right. The click-through rates were terrible.
Exactly. Google offered what advertisers desperately needed:
Hmm.
the ability to reach the right audience at the right moment. So if you were searching for trips to Moscow, boom, you'd immediately see ads for travel agencies selling those very trips. That precision, powered by their deep understanding of user intent from search queries, that became their absolute economic cornerstone.
And it still is, fundamentally.
It absolutely is. It's
Definitely.
still the key to their immense financial success today. And it just fundamentally changed how businesses connected with customers online. The IPO, don't be evil, and early corporate culture.
Okay, let's talk about the IPO. The initial public offering in 2004. That was one of the most anticipated, maybe the most anticipated in tech history back then. Interestingly, Larry and Sergey initially delayed it. They didn't want competitors like Yahoo or Microsoft knowing their true economic scale,
Hmm.
kept their cards close.
Right. But the immense pressure from early investors and also employees who were eager to, cash in their stock options, that eventually made the IPO inevitable. They couldn't hold out forever.
And the IPO itself was just an unprecedented success, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It instantly made Larry and Sergey billionaires, and it turned out 1,000 of their, 2,500 employees at the time into millionaires overnight.
Wow.
It was truly seen as this widely shared stroke of good fortune, kind of emblematic of the American way of life success story.
Yeah, the dream. But the author views this as a really significant turning point. He basically marks it as the moment Google began to change, to lose its insolent freshness and style. Strong words. He argues that by taking so much money, they metaphorically sold part of their soul to the devil or the markets. It's like that red pill of immense wealth fully took effect, subtly altering the company's DNA.
That's a really powerful interpretation, yeah. And it leads us right into a critical question about their famous motto, "Don't be evil."
Mhm.
Coined by an early employee, Paul Buchheit. It was originally meant as an internal reminder, right? A guiding principle for their conduct.
It's like a North Star, sort of.
Exactly. But the author suggests that after the IPO, and with that rapid expansion, it kind of transformed into, quote, a worn-out allegorical idea and not always respected.
Hmm.
He cites situations where it was seemingly disregarded in pursuit of market dominance or, profit.
That's a pretty strong claim. While the book certainly highlights instances of, let's say, ethical lapses, does the author also acknowledge any areas where Google has genuinely tried to uphold that motto? Or is his critique here mostly one-sided on this point?
Well, the book's focus is definitely on the, let's call it the darker side of Google's evolution, particularly post-IPO. Well, he doesn't really explicitly detail instances of them upholding the motto. His overarching point is that the spirit of "don't be evil," it just became increasingly difficult to maintain as the company grew into this global colossus, with immense market power and, crucially, shareholder obligation.
Right, the pressure from the markets.
Exactly. So it's less about specific good deeds he ignores and more about the perceived erosion of an original ideal.
Thinking about the famed Googleplex culture, all the free foods, scooters, massage chairs, it always sounded like the ultimate dream job from the outside. But hearing the author describe it sometimes as a management of fear, that's a truly jarring contrast. What specific details does he provide that make that factory in communist countries comparison, as one former employee apparently put it? What makes that ring true for him?
Well, he paints a picture where the famous 20% time for personal projects, which was often lauded as this hallmark of Google's innovation.
Yeah, everyone knew about that.
Right. But he argues it was frequently more of a marketing tool than a widespread reality for most employees. Most people were under constant pressure just to deliver on their core projects. The author describes this culture where efforts are kind of seen as never quite enough. And there's this subtle but pervasive pressure to, quote, break down the wall between work and home.
Ah.
It's not overt coercion, he says, but more this subtle integration of life and work, which for some created an environment where total dedication was expected, blurring personal boundaries. Kind of like the intense corporate cultures seen in, some planned economies, according to that one quote. Expansion, acquisitions, and conflicts. So following the IPO, Google moved incredibly swiftly beyond just search. It wasn't just a search engine anymore. Between its IPO in 2004 and 2011, it acquired over 100 companies, just vacuuming them up, rapidly transforming itself into the largest and most diversified tech company in the world. Their strategy seemed pretty clear: buy out anything that overshadowed them or posed any kind of potential threat.
And the YouTube acquisition in 2006 is just a classic example of this, right? Google Video, their own platform, had kind of failed to compete effectively in that burgeoning online video space.
Yeah, it wasn't getting traction.
So they simply bought YouTube for, what was it, $1.65 billion. The author amusingly notes how the YouTube founders apparently just mumbled when they announced the sale, barely able to contain their laughter at having made over $1 billion in less than 2 years. I mean, can you blame them?
It's a staggering sum, truly. And despite some initial skepticism about the price tag back then, this acquisition proved incredibly shrewd. It totally secured Google's dominance in online video. However, YouTube's explosive early growth was heavily fueled by a lot of unauthorized content, copyright infringement everywhere.
Right, the Wild West days.
Totally. And this led to massive legal problems over copyright, huge lawsuits, which necessitated the development of the Content ID tool, a huge technical undertaking to manage and police copyright on an unprecedented scale.
But even that wasn't perfect, was it?
Not at all. And what's particularly ironic, as the author points out, is that even with Content ID, tutorials on how to bypass Content ID are still easily found, well, on YouTube itself.
Huh, that's something. Now, despite these massive successes in areas like video, Google's social media ventures, things like Orkut and Google Buzz, they were notably less successful, weren't they? Especially when compared to Facebook's meteoric rise.
Yeah, they really struggled there.
The author argues that Google plus Av, their later attempt, was another, perhaps even more ambitious attempt to create a, quote, gigantic database for advertising purposes. He even quotes Eric Schmidt, Google's former CEO, sort of tacitly admitting it was primarily an extensive advertising database for the benefit of large corporations.
Oof. And that insight leads us to a really crucial point about Google's overarching strategy. Why does a company that publicly claims its mission is to organize the world's information for all humanity, why does it also so tightly control its own vast trove of data? Our data.
Good question.
The author meticulously details how Google collects just immense amounts of information about every user, from search patterns, personal interests, even your physical location via Maps and Android,
Well,
often without truly clear, explicit consent.
right, the terms and conditions no one reads.
Exactly. And as we've discussed, this granular information is then funneled directly into highly targeted advertising. The author's phrase, "nothing is free and no one is innocent," really encapsulates this dynamic perfectly, I think.
Yeah.
We might not pay with money for search or Gmail, but we certainly pay with our data. Battles and double standards, privacy, monopoly, and taxes.
And beyond just data collection, Google has faced numerous legal battles for its, well, aggressive expansion and practices. Google News, for instance, sparked major conflicts with media outlets over copyright and traffic. They were scraping content, basically.
Big fights there.
And a particularly stark example comes from Belgium. When media companies sued Google over using their content, Google's response, they just removed all of that media's content from its search index in Belgium. Imagine that, effectively making them disappear from the internet in a country where Google held over 90% market share.
Wow. That's really
It's a terrifying demonstration of power, really.
The author highlights this and a powerful illustration of Google's prepotence, he calls it, like an arrogant assertiveness, and the thin line between morality and legality that they often seem to navigate.
Right.
Google consistently claims, oh, we're just a neutral intermediary, a mere conduit for information. Yet, they financially benefit massively from content they don't directly pay for, and they can exert enormous control, often forcing content creators to, in the author's words, pass through the hoop of their platform if you want any visibility at all.
Another really significant front has been Google Books. Their ambition to digitize the world's knowledge, creating a modern Library of Alexandria, that sounded amazing.
It did sound amazing.
But it's been plagued by copyright lawsuits, particularly in the US and France, big ones.
Right. And while Google frames this project as this noble endeavor, preserving cultural heritage, making information universally accessible, critics, and the author aligns with them here, argue it's ultimately an attempt to monopolize access to information and, of course, to exploit content for profit down the line. The author consistently circles back to this idea. Google offers its services for free, quote unquote.
But we pay with our data.
Exactly. This isn't philanthropy. It's a strategic accumulation of content and data that further solidifies their already dominant market position.
And, the company's cool and innovative image is further challenged by its tax practices. This is a big one.
Oh, yeah.
The author details how Google reroutes massive revenues through subsidiaries in low-tax jurisdictions. Think Ireland, Bermuda, the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich.
That whole complex structure, yeah.
Paying just a tiny fraction of what they would otherwise owe in the countries where they actually make the money. For example, in 2009, Google apparently paid only 672,000 euros in UK taxes on an estimated 1.4 billion euros in revenue generated in the UK.
Yeah. The disparity is huge.
It's a massive disparity.
And this creative tax planning, as it's sometimes called, it allows Google to effectively avoid significant taxation in many of the countries where it generates immense revenue. This particular practice isn't just, clever accounting in the author's view. He frames it as a pivotal indicator of how Google, post-IPO, actively distanced itself from its initial idealistic image, prioritizing global profit optimization even at the expense of local tax contributions.
Right. Contributions that support the infrastructure they use.
Exactly. In the very countries it dominates, it raises really serious questions about corporate responsibility, about fairness to local businesses and taxpayers who don't have those same global structures.
And then, of course, there's privacy. Always comes back to privacy. Google Street View. Undeniably an amazing tool for navigation, right? We've all used it.
Incredibly useful, yeah.
But it faced numerous legal challenges for collecting Wi-Fi data from unsecured networks as the cars drove by. Remember that?
Oh, the Wi-Spy scandal, yeah. That was big.
And just photographing people without clear, explicit consent. Google's common response to these kinds of concerns is often to put the burden back on the user. You request removal.
Right. Or just saying, install only applications you trust when Android apps are found to be sharing sensitive data without permission. It's on you.
Yeah, victim blaming almost.
It leads directly to Google's infamous stance, or rather, the one articulated by Eric Schmidt back then, that only those with something to hide want privacy.
Right, if you've got nothing to hide.
Exactly. However, the author presents this really powerful counterexample. When CNET, a prominent tech magazine, tried to apply this very logic, they published Eric Schmidt's publicly available personal data, salary, neighborhood, hobbies, all found via Google searches on public records.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah. Google retaliated swiftly. They blacklisted CNET reporters for about a year, refused to speak with them. It exposed such a clear double standard, revealing that privacy is apparently not just for those with something to hide, but also, very importantly, for those in positions of power within the company itself. Outro.
Well, this deep dive into Google's hidden history, as the author presents it, it certainly gives us a tremendous amount to consider, doesn't it?
It really does.
From its, undeniably ingenious search beginnings to its relentless expansion into pretty much every corner of our digital lives. The picture is far more complex, far more nuanced than the smiling skateboarding founders might suggest.
Absolutely. We've truly seen how innovation and immense utility can coexist with, aggressive business practices, ongoing legal battles, and a really profound impact on our privacy and the global economy. Google is indeed a colossus, as the author says, with a very, very complex relationship with that original idea of don't be evil.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, the user, who likely relies on Google every single day, probably multiple times a day? Perhaps it's just a powerful reminder to think critically about the services we use, the information we so readily share, and the often unseen trade-offs we make in this increasingly digital age.
Yeah, and this brings up such a crucial point. In a world where one company holds so much power over information, what responsibility do we have as users to actually understand its true nature and the implications of our own digital footprint?
It's a great question. So next time you use a free Google service, maybe Gmail or Search or Maps, I invite you to just pause for a second and consider, what are you truly paying for?